You are unsparing in the book and very open and honest about U.S. leadership and how they've misjudged Putin, from George W. Bush to Barack Obama to Donald Trump to Joe Biden, who came after your book, but you've written enough and said enough publicly about him. I know how you feel. Let's just go back and start there for a bit, because I know with George W. Bush, you feel he backed himself into a corner with that "I looked into his eyes and saw his soul" remark, in a way that sort of handicapped him from being stronger against Putin. If you wouldn't mind just setting the stage for where Putin was in his leadership then, right? Because you talk about how the democracy experiment in Russia was about 8 years. It took about 8 years from the time the Soviet Union fell to the time they elected a former KGB agent, and he started to slowly eradicate all those democratic reforms bit by bit. Didn't take him that long. So that's the young Putin at that time. And talk about what happened after 9/11 and how George W. Bush really hamstrung the United States from being stronger as he eroded those freedoms that had been budding not so long ago in Russia.
But since we have time, so I can afford a little detour in history, and I can say that I have pretty amazing record of criticizing 6 U.S. presidents. It started with my criticism of Bush 41, and then followed with Bill Clinton. So that's why, if I could present myself as a truly bipartisan or non-partisan critic of U.S. foreign policy based on facts. So that's why, when some people blame me after publication of my book, In the Winter's Coming, for being so anti-Obama, I pointed out that, I had a pretty good record of going after any president who did, as I believe, something wrong vis-a-vis Russia, a former Soviet Union, and this part of the world. Speaking about this meeting in Slovenia in June that you mentioned, I think that was the beginning of Putin's rise as a leader of Russia, who managed to charm his Western counterparts, and he used his KGB knowledge. I think the tricks were quite primitive, but it did work, and we all know that one of the turning points in the conversation between Vladimir Putin and Bush 43 was the story that Putin told him, I believe invented, about him being baptized in the Soviet Union and wearing the cross given by the mother, and how he always had it on his chest and had to hide it because it was not it wouldn't be welcome in KGB. Okay, baptized, cross in the KGB. Okay, give me a break. So, but it did work. Bush, a devoted Christian, he bought the story. And it created a bond. And we should give Putin credit. He knew how to work with people. He could read psychology. He could read people. That's why he was so successful in winning favors and then even friendship from some of the foreign leaders. And eventually, bringing them to the side, even using more direct means like bribes.
And Garry, just to interject before you continue, even when I interviewed Putin, and I spent a fair amount of time with him in 3 separate sit-downs, one of the first things he said to me, and he knew that I was the mother of 3 children, was how much his mother meant to him, what a close relationship he had with her. It was an obvious manipulation.
Absolutely, absolutely. He always, tried to play, for strengths or weaknesses of the opponent. It's well known that his first meeting with Angela Merkel, knowing that she did dislike dogs, he brought his dog, to the meeting. So this is again, he knew how to work with individuals at, this KGB school, also probably lessons from the streets of Leningrad, some of the sub-criminal culture where it was very important for survival, to actually read your counterpart, to read your friend or your enemy. And it did work with Bush. And then the moment came, 9/11. He was the first foreign leader calling Bush. He knew that was something that would stay in Bush's mind. It doesn't matter what he said, he just offered, condolences and full support. And he knew that he had Bush, on his side. And anything he did afterwards, I think that Bush had great difficulty until the invasion of Georgia in 2008, difficulty of looking at Putin's record. looking at not only his record, in KGB, this presidency, but also his record as a president, the Second Chechen War, the hostage crisis in Nordost, the theater in Moscow, when the hostages and terrorists were killed, many 150 roughly were killed by this North agent. Beslan, the school was burned, also terrorist attack. The school was burned to the ground, with 335 people being killed, more than half of them children, and the murders of political opponents, including Litvinenko, a former KGB spy who was poisoned by polonium-210 in London. So everything that could point out at Putin's true colors, Bush ignored, because I think the power of the first contact, and also the Putin's willingness to always accommodate Bush, because they had many more meetings afterwards. And that's all, helped Putin to neutralize America's opposition, even at the point where they went after Yukos and Mikhail Khodorkovsky, the most successful oil company in Russia, the biggest one. And it was about to merge with one of the largest U.S. corporations to create the mega company that would hopefully, I thought, change the course of Russia, and it would bring our country into this global trade as a partner, not a spoiler. And Putin stopped it. In President Khodorkovsky, a privatized or reprivatized company, gave it to his own buddies. And U.S. administration, okay, shrug their shoulders.
Because they seem to have an attitude of, look, all the stuff that's happening in Russia, that's Russia's problem. We have our own problems here on the side of the United States. We're now fighting a war against bin Laden, the Taliban, and we're not going to be able to focus on their human rights for the time being. But you make the case, okay, that's one thing, 9/11, but because you're a master strategist. That's how you achieved all of these chess titles and victories all your life. We should have been, as you write, quote, pressing our advantage as soon as the Berlin Wall came down. And instead, as soon as it came down, we pressed the brakes. We retreated. And so it wasn't just, after 9/11, we were busy. The two previous presidents who you said you criticized, H.W. and Clinton, didn't handle things the way they should have. Once we had the moral authority after the Berlin Wall fell.
Yes, going back to 1991, because it's relevant, since one of the very important moments in 1991 was Bush's famous speech in Kiev, Chicken Kiev speech, a few months before the collapse of the Soviet Union. And in this speech, allegedly penned by Condoleezza Rice, he warned Ukrainians about the pro-independence movement. He warned them not to follow their nationalists, because it could lead to the collapse of the Soviet Union. And then that was a nightmare for Bush and his cabinet, for his state secretary of state, Jim Baker III. So they were terrified by the potential collapse of the Soviet Union, because they didn't know how to handle it. It was a chaos, and they wanted to avoid it. So
let me just give you, because we cut us out of that, knowing that you might reference that, and we have a little soundbite of Bush 41 in what you call, again, the Chicken Kiev speech, 1991. Here he is.
In Moscow, I outlined our approach. We will support those in the center and the republics who pursue freedom, democracy, and economic liberty. We will determine our support not on the basis of personalities, but on the basis of principles. And we cannot tell you how to reform your society. We will not try to pick winners and losers in political competition between republics or between republics in the center. That is your business. It's not the business of the United States of America. Do not doubt our real commitment, however, to reform. Do not think we can presume to solve your problems for you.
So what's he trying to say there, Garry?
It was a clear message, stay with Gorbachev, reform, but don't disintegrate. And it's amazing. I was young. I was 28 in 1991. But I knew that the Soviet Union was doomed. And I was, I have to admit, shocked by this all-powerful American intelligence, because we heard stories about Pentagon and about CIA, and just, looking just at the wrong things and making predictions that I knew would not materialize. On November 15th, 5 weeks before the collapse of the Soviet Union, Edward Shevardnadze, who was reappointed Soviet foreign minister, visited Washington, D.C. I was also there, I was receiving an award there. And I saw on TV, it's a big celebration. Bush and Baker and other members of cabinet, they received Shevardnadze, and they talked about a new dawn in Soviet-American relations. Again, 5 weeks before the collapse of the Soviet Union. Mm. And why it's important? Because now we're seeing it's like a repetition of history. We are revisiting it. Because I think one of the problems of this administration, of all relevant agencies, like Pentagon, CIA, the state, is the same fear that if Ukraine wins the war and Putin's army is defeated, Crimea is returned back to Ukraine and Putin regime collapses, what happens in Russia? So for me, it's like, seeing the sequel. And that's why I want to remind our audience about 1991. But it's amazing that now we are in 2022. We could have learned something. Mm-hmm. And as you said, the collapse of the Soviet Union and the end of the Cold War offered America a unique opportunity to rebuild the world, to offer a new vision. In 1992, America was all powerful. You could have reformed the United Nations. You could have demanded that countries would not be simply paying lip service to democratic procedures, but will carry general reforms. Democracy was a fashion. Everybody wanted to be democratic or at least look democratic. So, and then 8 years of Clinton, 8 Clinton years, and then, Al-Qaeda was ready to strike. The attack on America in 2001 and 9/11, I think, was a result of failure of imagination.
Hey, thanks so much for watching. If you like what you just saw, hit the subscribe button for more clips and full episodes.